Hello and welcome to Behind the Music. I'm Kareem Bedder, and in this series I'm here to give you a composer's insight into some of the music you know and love. In today's video, as part of the ABRSM Piano Grade Edition, we'll be looking at a modern piece in a historical style, Jester's Gigue, and I'll be showing you step by step how you could have written this energetic little piece of music all for yourself. Before we get going, if you'd like to hear a full playthrough, click the link in the description below. Otherwise, let's get on with it. Today you're going to take on the role of someone who loves to bring the magic of music to developing piano players. You're none other than pianist, composer and music mentor Chee-Hwa Tan. You were transported to countless cultures and places through the music you learned as a child. And now, equally undaunted by the prospect of time travel, you're determined to take us back to the Baroque era with a suite of piano solos called a royal birthday celebration. Like classic German Baroque suites written in the style of famous composers like Bach, Handel or Telemann, you want to include a tried and tested format, taking us through a prelude and an array of popular dances of the era, all with a 21st century twist. You've already written a birthday prelude, a little allemande, a courante for the court mice, a sarabande for the suitors, a blues bourrée, and even a minstrel's minuet. But Bach wouldn't have stopped there. How could you end the Baroque suite without an energetic gigue? And who better to dance it than the court jester? Pull up the piano stool, grab some paper. It's time to write a gigue fit for a queen. And her jester. First, let's choose a key and a time signature. The rest of the suite centres around C major, so it makes sense to stick with that. And for a gigue, we need a compound meter like 6/8 or 12/8, or 1 under 2 under, or 1 under 2 under 3 under 4 under. Since it's an energetic finale to the suite, it would be good to go with a fairly fast speed. So instead of having 3 quavers to the beat, like 6/8 or 12/8, why don't we reflect that visually with the note lengths we're using by having 3 semiquavers to a beat instead, giving us something like 6/16 or 12/16. And I think, since some longer meandering phrases might be nice, let's go with that 12/16 for a whole 4 dotted quaver beats in a bar. For the first musical idea, a stream of semiquavers will help give us that feel of a Baroque gigue, just like some of these examples. Now that we've got some ideas to work with, let's start our own version with an outline of a rising arpeggio. We're in the key of C major, let's go with C major. And at the top, we can keep the semiquavers moving by doing a little alternating pattern to move down from and back up to the C via its neighbouring note below. Nice. It really paints the picture of our jester doing a little kick. Why don't we keep the part we just wrote for beat 2 and use it after some other arpeggios as well? Chord 4, F major, could work as it has the note C in it too. So let's use that. And we can use a falling pattern instead of that rising pattern, just to add an arc to the shape of the music. Then we can bring back the C major, but this time let's have that descending as well to keep things varied and keep it interesting. Now that's nice so far, but it might get boring if we repeat the idea too much. So let's invert the C major chord for the next bar. And add in some stepwise motion from one of the chord tones E. And we can fill in the gaps with some more stepwise motion through the scale of C major. In the interest of keeping things fresh and interesting, having the first phrase last an extra half a bar might allow us to overlap some phrases and break up the regular 4-bar phrases that we normally hear and that we can easily get locked into when we're writing music. So that's a really nice way to make the music sound more free-flowing and improvisational, like a lot of Baroque music by composers like Bach. And the scalic ending certainly does the trick. But maybe we could add something on the 3rd beat. If we carry on that scale, we'll land on B. Now, since that note's not part of the C major chord, we could use this as an opportunity to bring in a bit of modulation and move the music on. So how about we put the tune into a different key? Which one? Well, B is part of the G major chord 5 in C major. So why don't we bring in the initial idea transposed fully to G major, overlapping that ending we just had of the first phrase? We can copy the entire of the first phrase exactly into our new key. But let's add in a second idea. Like we often see in a fugue, which is another popular Baroque form and a compositional technique to bring in different voices overlapping each other, we can use that to fill out the texture and make it sound more interesting. Some higher staccato notes marking the start of each beat would be good, and the notes can outline the chords that we're suggesting in the tune's arpeggios, C and G. With this extra musical idea, we're going to have to put all the notes from the first idea into the left hand, so to make it easier to play, we can split the top note, G, between the two hands rather than forcing the left hand to play everything all of a sudden. And now we get to the scaling bit, moving the tune into the right hand, whilst also filling out the harmony that the tune could be implying by putting those staccato notes we're adding into the left hand. Suggesting a 5-1 in G seems like quite a nice way to end the phrase strongly, so we can have. Right, now we're on a roll. Let's stick in another transposition of that original tune. I've got a feeling this one could be a launching pad for some new material too. We can put the new tune into D major to rack up the tension. D is basically another fifth above G, which is already a fifth above the original key of C major. So that gives us a secondary dominant or 5 of 5 feel. But let's not just repeat it exactly this time. For a bit more variety, let's develop the arpeggio idea by using the rising and falling arpeggios on every beat. Below some more staccato notes. That sounds like the Jester's hopping to me.
Oh, can we have one dinner where we're not watching Jester?
I'll hit mute.
Now it feels like we've gone far enough from the original musical ideas, so we'll want to think about bringing the section to a close before too long. To stretch the tension even further though, to get us to the point where it feels like it's time to come back, it might be useful to extend the D major part a little more before we finish the current section. So for the end of the 4-bar phrase, we can use a scalic link in the right hand to bring us back to D. And move the staccato notes down into the left hand to reinforce our chord progression. Ready to bring the main tune back in. Great stuff. We're bringing it back now, but we probably want to wrap up this section soon so it doesn't become a whole suite in its own right. So let's prepare a way to get us back to C major. It feels like it would be nice to have something after this section to make the jig long enough to feel complete. So if we can end this section firmly in G, then that will do a nice job of pulling us back to where we started in C major by the end of the piece. So how are we going to get there from bar 9? If we use the first bar of the tune as normal, and then modify a repeated version of the same bar, we can change it to outline D7, which gives us a clear feeling that we want to move back to G. So now we can restate the original tune in the key of G. And we can finish by reusing a transposed version of that linking pattern from bar 9 to help us settle into a big G major arpeggiated chord at the end. Let's make the most of it with a little flourish. A lower mordant, and build up the G major chord, just like Bach does, layering up the notes one by one to hear a full ringing chord by the end. That's a bold and clear ending to the section, almost like a big bow just as someone important walked into the room. Tell me in the comments who you think it was.
No butcher, no baker, no candlestick maker, and me with the look of a fine undertaker impressed her? As a jester?
And it gets us exactly where we wanted to be. in G, the dominant key, a great place to start a new section that's eventually going to bring us back to our home key of C major by the end of the piece. Now, to balance a piece and make sure it's not too short, we can repeat the whole first section before we're finally ready for the second section. The Jester's not finished his dance quite yet. He's just warming up for the real acrobatics. First, we'll need an idea to kickstart the action. Now, we could use something similar to the first section, but it's going to be much more interesting to listen to and to play if we go in a slightly different direction. It still wants to be coherent with what we've got so far, so why don't we use the arpeggio and staccato notes from earlier to inspire us with what we're going to create for the main material. Since we're making the arpeggio a central part of the music here, it would be helpful to rely on the harmony to lead the way this time. The big G major chord at the end of the last section can be a good jumping off point. So let's try developing the idea and stick with G major at the start of this section before we try and find our way back to the home key of C major by the end. Time to choose some chords to use. As we said, let's start with G. We can use a 4-chord progression. Let's have a 1, 4, 2, 5 to write 4 bars that will firmly establish this new key of G. So that would give us chord 1, G, 4, C, chord 2, A minor, and chord 5, D. Now, to avoid this jumping triad feel that's a bit uncomfortable to play, let's use some inversions for some of the chords. We can keep the G from the G chord to get C over G, and we can keep that A from A minor to get D over A. So this keeps the movement to a minimum and makes the whole progression sound a lot smoother. To make 2-5 at the end sound a little bit more interesting, we can change that chord A minor to A major. As this isn't actually in the key of G major because of that note C sharp, we can think of it as a secondary dominant. I might have mentioned it earlier, but that basically means the dominant of any chord other than the tonic, chord 1. This is usually done to give us the dominant chord above chord 5, the dominant of the dominant, or we can think of it as a 5 of 5. Hence the name secondary dominant. Great, so that gives us our G, C over G, A, D over A. And that chord 5, D over A, takes us back neatly to our chord 1, G. So let's start the next 4-bar progression with G again. In fact, why not repeat the first 2 chords? But if we want to wrap the piece up soon, we still need to modulate back to C major to feel C major as chord 1 again. So now could be a good chance to start suggesting the key of C at the end of the current phrase. What better way to do this than to use a 5-1, especially with a 7th in chord 5 with G7 to C. And that allows us to feel C as a key centre again. That G7 really pushes this with the 7th, F natural, wanting to lead down to E. And so far both chords, G and C over G, have a G in the bass. If we keep that G in the bass going, it's going to give us a feeling of what's called a dominant pedal. G is the dominant note of C major, and the pedal is just that repeated note being emphasised throughout. And that's going to give us a sense of tension building up as we come to the close. So our chords are going to be G, C over G, G7, back to C over G. Great, now it feels like we're back in C, but we're not quite there just yet. We need at least one more phrase to bring it home. Now 2-5-1 is one option of a progression to end it with a bang, but let's try something new. 4-5-1 is another common progression to end a phrase decisively in that key, so let's go with that. Chord 4, F, chord 5, G, chord 1, C. But let's make use of that 7th again on the G for a bit of a stronger ending. And let's fill in the gap at the start of the phrase. We're bridging the gap between C over G at the end of the previous phrase with F. So we could use a chord that shares common notes with both of these. A minor shares 2 notes with C, C and E, and 2 notes with F, the A and the C. You can think of this as a way to kind of pivot smoothly between the chords. To make the bass line more obvious, we can keep these chords in root position for a change. So we've just got nice. Now we have all our chords planned out. So let's apply that arpeggio pattern we talked about earlier to all of them. For the 7th chords, we can miss out the 3rd of the chord just to fit that rhythm. So here we go. We've got that constant rising pattern, sure to up the energy towards the end of the jig. And to announce the end, we might want to change it up and break that arpeggio pattern that we set up for the rest of the section. But let's come back to that later to see if we can get any ideas from the tune. Speaking of which, as this piece is part of a suite for royal birthday celebrations, why don't we take some inspiration from the rhythm of the famous Happy Birthday tune? Let's take that rhythm to outline the chords we've already figured out. To give it a nice musical symmetry, let's make it move in the opposite direction to that rising left-hand pattern. And since there's space for a 4th note in that rhythmic snippet, let's repeat note 1 of the chord, the octave below the left hand, by crossing all the way over. Forget hopping, our court jesters started leaping around the palace. That will add a nice jaunty feel to the dance and make it extra fun and challenging to play. Let's see if we can repeat that pattern to fill out the first 4-bar phrase. And we can start the next phrase in the same way. But let's develop it. We can be clever and make more of a melodic line that still fits completely with the chords if we start on D at the end of the bar 19. And move down to a C at the start of the next one, bar 20. Then we can do a little jiggy jump up to the next note in the chord and repeat that note crossing over into the lower octave again. This whole idea will work again by moving it all up 1 note in the next bar. And for the following bar, we could do the same again, but as we're at the end of this 4-bar phrase, why not reverse that direction? And this time, let's land on the low C to reinforce that we're now back in C after that G7 chord. Now we're coming up to the end. Let's make the most of what time we have left by getting that melody to soar up a little bit higher, just as the Jester's trying to do the same thing. We can repeat one of the notes in common to both chords C and A minor. Let's stay roughly in the same range we're before. E works well, so we can write in 2 E's, and we'll have a slightly bigger jump up to the next chord tone, A. And since this is the last movement in the suite, let's see if we can end on a big happy birthday for the king or queen.
Happy birthday! If you haven't brought me any presents, I'm going to have you executed.
We can use the second happy birthday from the famous song, since it lands on note 1 of the key C. And change it slightly to make it fit 4 beats, because it's normally in 3. So we're just stretching out the birth part. Happy birthday to you. And as promised, we'll break that arpeggio pattern here by sticking some big, bouncy, jolly sounding chords underneath to lead us up to the last bar, where the Jester's ready to end. As he does, let's have our monarch blow out the candles on the cake, and just as the lights go out, our Jester tumbles down with a falling arpeggio passed between the hands, finishing things off just as it began.
Okay, that's enough. Oh, no.
And there it is, one jolly Jester's jig to finish off the birthday celebrations. If you'd like to hear a full playthrough of this finished piece of music, then click the link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Music. If you did, then please leave a like, share with a friend, comment down below, and if you want to make sure you don't miss any future videos, why not hit that subscribe button and bell icon to make sure you're notified whenever I post a new one. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, don't just have a good one, make it a masterpiece. See you in the next video.